All right, so we now get to the battle with Grendel. We've had a lot of talk up to this point, and now Beowulf's actually going to have to, put his money where his mouth is, right? So Hrothgar and his followers leave Herat. Beowulf and just the Geats, the 14 men that he brought with him, stay. All right. Beowulf, remember, is fighting without a sword because Grendel doesn't fight with a sword, and they're all sleeping in Herat, just waiting for Grendel to show up. Out from the marsh, from the foot of misty hills and bogs, bearing God's hatred, Grendel came, hoping to kill anyone he could trap on this trip to high Herat. He moved quickly through the cloudy night, up from his swampland, sliding silently toward that gold-shining hall. He had visited Hrothgar's home before, knew the way, but never before nor after that night found Herat defended so firmly, his reception so harsh. So here we have a really nice example of that, of foreshadowing here. Okay. We, we know that this isn't going to go very well for him, right? Because, it went ahead and kind of tells us that. Okay. And here, like this little note here on the side tells us we've got these Seishuras, right? Out from the marsh, from the foot of misty hills and bogs, bearing God's hatred, Grendel came, hoping to kill anyone he could trap on this trip to High Herat, right? So we've got that. It slows everything down, right? It makes everything seem a lot more kind of ominous, right? Because we have Grendel stalking through the night, coming up to Herat, thinking that he's going to be able to just, gorge like he normally does, enjoy his, Danish buffet. And we know that it's going to be a little bit different. He journeyed, forever joyless, straight to the door, then snapped it open, tore its iron fasteners with a touch, and rushed angrily over the threshold. He strode quickly across the inlaid floor, snarling and fierce. His eyes gleamed in the darkness, burned with a gruesome light. Then he stopped, seeing the hall crowded with sleeping warriors, stuffed with rows of young soldiers resting together, and his heart laughed. He relished the sight, intended to tear the life from those bodies by morning. The monster's mind was hot with the thought of food and the feasting his belly would soon know. But fate that night intended Grendel to gnaw the broken bones of his last human supper. So again, bit of foreshadowing, right? Obviously, this is his last night of doing so. It means he's not going to get to keep doing it. And Grendel's like joy at being able to create mayhem and to murder, again, just shows us how monstrous he is. Like this is truly a creature of nightmare. And especially when he sees this, like all these just sleeping guys waiting for him. You have to think, over the last 12 years, very few people have been willing to even sleep in Herat anymore. So for Grendel to come up and, find 15 people all sleeping there waiting to be murdered by him was probably really exciting. Human eyes were watching his evil steps, waiting to see his swift, hard claws. Grendel snatched at the first Geat he came to, ripped him apart, cut his body to bits with powerful jaws, drank the blood from his veins, and bolted him down, hands and feet. Death and Grendel's great teeth came together, snapping life shut. Then he stepped to another still body, clutched at Beowulf with his claws, grasped at a strong-hearted, wakeful sleeper, and was instantly seized himself. Claws bent back as Beowulf leaned up on one arm. So here, this is that tone shift, right? Everything's great. He's so excited. He's going to rip him to pieces. Okay. We have that nice repeated B sound, body, bits, blood, bolted, right? As, just kind of showing the strength of Grendel. It really emphasizes that. And he just, swallows a Geat whole basically, because, he thinks he's delicious. But then he goes to grab another one and it's Beowulf. And then that's not good, right? Strong-hearted, wakeful sleeper. Beowulf is only pretending to be asleep at this point. That shepherd of evil, guardian of crime, knew at once that nowhere on earth had he met a man whose hands were harder. His mind was flooded with fear, but nothing could take his talons and himself from that tight, hard grip. Grendel's one thought was to run from Beowulf, flee back to his marsh and hide there. This was a different Herat than the hell he had emptied. But Higlac's follower remembered his final boast and, standing erect, stopped the monster's flight, fastened those claws in his fists till they cracked, clutched Grendel closer. Right, so we have this monster who can snatch up 30 men at once and murder whoever he feels like. And all at once we have a man with no weaponry, who is just squishing this monster, right? He's just squeezing him and refusing to let him run away. The infamous killer fought for his freedom, wanting no flesh but retreat, desiring nothing but escape. His claws had been caught. He was trapped. That trip to Herat was a miserable journey for the writhing monster. The high hall rang, its roof boards swayed, and Danes shook with terror. Down the aisles, the battle swept, angry and wild. Herat trembled, wonderfully built to withstand the blows, the struggling great bodies beating at its beautiful walls, shaped and fastened with iron inside and out, artfully worked. The building stood firm. Its benches rattled, fell to the floor, gold-covered boards grating as Grendel and Beowulf battled across them. Hrothgar's wise men had fashioned Herat to stand forever. Only fire, they had planned, could shatter what such skill had put together, swallow in hot flames such splendor of ivory and iron and wood. All those repeated B's in that section that it's asking about here, 293 to 300, it shows that violence, right? This kind of massive quaking fight that these two titans are having, and about how the hall is kind of being shaken down to its very floorboards, trying to contain it. Suddenly the sounds changed. The Danes started in new terror, cowering in their beds as the terrible screams of the Almighty's enemies sang in the darkness. The horrible shrieks of pain and defeat, the tears torn out of Grendel's taut throat, Hell's captive caught in the arms of him who of all men on earth was the strongest. So here we have many kennings for Grendel. We have Almighty's enemy. We have Hell's captive. We have, there's another one up here. Infamous killer, okay, shepherd of evil, guardian of crime, all of these different ways of referring to Grendel, to kind of prove how evil he is. That mighty protector of men meant to hold the monster till its life leapt out, knowing the fiend was no use to anyone in Denmark. All of Beowulf's band had jumped from their beds, ancestral swords raised and ready, determined to protect their prince if they could. Their courage was great, but all wasted. They could hack at Grendel from every side, trying to open a path for his evil soul, but their points could not hurt him. The sharpest and hardest iron could not scratch at his skin. For that sin-stained demon, yet another kenning, had bewitched all men's weapons, laid spells that blunted every mortal man's blade. And yet his time had come, his days were over, his death near. Down to hell he would go, swept groaning and helpless to the waiting hands of still worse fiends. So here we learn that it actually ends up being a good thing that Beowulf didn't try to use his weapon, and he only relies on the strength of his hands because Grendel had kind of cursed all of the men's weapons, that basically no weapon could hurt him. So again, fate being with Beowulf here. Now he discovered, once the afflictor of men, tormentor of their days, what it meant to feud with Almighty God. Grendel saw that his strength was deserting him, his claws bound fast, Higlac's brave follower tearing at his hands. The monster's hatred rose higher, but his power had gone. He twisted in pain, and the bleeding sinews deep in his shoulder snapped. Muscle and bone split and broke. The battle was over. Beowulf had been granted new glory. Grendel escaped, but wounded as he was, could flee to his den, his miserable hole at the bottom of the marsh, only to die, to wait for the end of all his days. So he escapes, but he leaves something very important behind, his arm. And after that bloody combat, the Danes laughed with delight. He who had come to them from across the sea, bold and strong-minded, had driven affliction off, purged Herat clean. He was happy now with that night's fierce work. The Danes had been served as he'd boasted he'd served them. Beowulf, a prince of the Geats, had killed Grendel, ended the grief, the sorrow, the suffering forced on Hrothgar's helpless people by a bloodthirsty fiend. No Dane doubted the victory, for the proof hanging high from the rafters where Beowulf had hung it was the monster's arm, claw, and shoulder and all. That's a very pagan thing. The whole idea of like taking a trophy from your kill. I imagine that Christianity would probably frown upon that. But Beowulf is an Anglo-Saxon, and Anglo-Saxons take prizes, and that's the prize from his fight with Grendel. And then in the morning, crowds surrounded Herat, warriors coming to that hall from faraway lands, princes and leaders of men hurrying to behold the monster's great staggering tracks. They gaped with no sense of sorrow, felt no regret for his suffering, went tracing his bloody footprints, his beaten and lonely flight to the edge of the lake where he dragged his corpse-like way, doomed and already weary of his vanishing life. The water was bloody, steaming and boiling in horrible pounding waves. Heat sucked from his magic veins, but the swirling surf had covered his death. Hidden deep in the murky darkness, his miserable end as hell opened to receive him. Then old and young rejoiced, turned back from that happy pilgrimage, mounted their hard-hoofed horses, high-spirited stallions, and rode them slowly toward Herat again, retelling Beowulf's bravery as they jogged along. And here, that repeated H it's uplifting, right? It sounds heroic, okay, and that's how they feel because of Beowulf's bravery. And over they swore that nowhere on earth or under the spreading sky or between the seas, neither south nor north, was there a warrior worthier to rule over men. But no one meant Beowulf's praise to belittle Hrothgar, their kind and gracious king. And sometimes, when the path ran straight and clear, they would let their horses race, red and brown and yellow backs streaming down the road. And sometimes a proud old soldier who had heard songs of the ancient heroes and could sing them all through, story after story, would weave a net of words for Beowulf's victory, tying the knot of his verses smoothly, swiftly into place with the poet's quick skill, singing his new song aloud while he shaped it and the old songs as well. So here we have who would this be, right? The soldier who knows the songs of the ancient heroes and could sing them all through, right, by heart. He's obviously a bard, right? And he's now writing Beowulf's story as well. So this idea that, it's a living history. It's constantly being added to, and the greatness of men is a huge part of it, right? And so Beowulf has now become part of that like ancient tapestry of Anglo-Saxon of history of lore, and I'm sure he'd be very pleased with that. I think he would love that. Okay, so the monster's dead. Yay! Everything's over. Just kidding. There's another monster that Beowulf's going to have to deal with, and we'll deal with it later as well. All right, bye guys.